Hey y'all, I'm Jill Reagan and welcome back to Whispering Willow Farm. Today's video is all about fall gardening one-on-one. We are going to talk about planning and preparing to plant your fall and winter gardens. This is fresh on my mind. I just did a webinar all about timing your winter garden. Happens to be my favorite time. July is such a just signal of shift for me. We have officially, started seeding all of those fall and winter crops in our greenhouse. We grow the bulk of our food during the fall and winter months, which is a lot of fun. For those of you who don't know, we are growing in central Arkansas. My zone is 7B, and my husband and I farm full time. We grow food for our family year round, and there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. There is a lot of planning that comes with that, but my goodness, there's a lot of joy of knowing that we are providing our family's needs primarily from our farm, which is really, really cool. So I just wanted to share with you guys today. The shift of the seasons have approached and I am in full-blown planning mode. I wanted to share with you guys what this looks like. How am I able to grow food for my family year-round? What are some of the things that I'm considering so that you guys can plan accordingly as well and have bountiful harvest throughout the fall and winter? And I think one of the first things I want to talk about is breaking this seasonal barrier. You know, I know so many people who only grow food during the spring and summer, and as great as that is, what happens during those fall and winter months when we are having to be reliant on the grocery store again? That's not a fun thing. And so I really believe that everyone can grow food year-round at some scale and some capacity. That might not mean growing as big of a garden as you did in the summertime, but any garden, no matter how small, is still impactful. And so the first garden I ever grew during the winter, the fall and winter, I knew I couldn't go all in, right? And I actually talk and teach a lot about, let's just like drop this whole go big or go home mentality. There is power in starting small, staying small, and really having efficient systems. And so I knew I've never grown food in the wintertime before. How do I set myself up for success? How do I be efficient and still make an impact? And so I decided I was gonna grow brassicas. And so I seeded broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage. These were the only 3 brassicas I grew on my farm. I had 2 little humbled raised bed gardens, but I did it. I grew a lot of broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage in those 2 raised beds. We were able to eat a lot fresh. We were able to can and ferment. We were able to freeze and put up, and it empowered me that even at a small scale, I could have a big impact. So then that following fall and winter garden season, I decided I was gonna add in root crops. I did some, frost tolerant radishes. I did some carrots, some rutabagas, some parsnips. And so each season I just kept adding new crops, and I kept honing in my skill and figuring out how to plan better and be efficient better. And I knew if I can just take a baby step forward each season, maybe a few years, down the road, I can have a big fall and winter garden like I did a summer garden. And now here we are several years in, and we are growing the bulk of our food through the fall and winter season. It is so much more enjoyable for us. You deal with a lot of you deal with fewer issues, I find, in my zone. And so I do like to encourage a lot of people to, grow a fall and winter garden, test it out, see if you like it. And so we are gonna dive into that today, and I am just really excited. So I do think it's important to kind of give an overview of why you would want to grow food during the fall and winter. For me, everything I do is driven by why and purpose, right? And so that's kind of what keeps you going when maybe you have a few of those setbacks. And so one of the reasons you would want to start growing food in the fall and winter is the obvious reason of extending your harvest. You are growing beyond that spring and summer season. You're able to have food security. You're able to reduce your carbon footprint. And honestly, it's just really empowering being able to learn how to eat seasonally and grow food for your family no matter what scale. Also, nutrient content goes up. There are so many varieties that when you grow them in the wintertime, like kale and Brussels sprouts, spinach, they take on a sweeter note, but they actually have a higher nutritional content, which is really cool. And so some of these things that maybe you've tried to grow in the wrong season, like kale and spinach, some of that can become bitter if you're growing it during those warmer months. They actually taste so much better after they've been exposed to some of that, cold temperatures. So I encourage you, even if you tried some of these varieties and you've grown them in the summertime, try them again in the fall and the winter, because you might be surprised just how their flavor profile changes. And oftentimes when you start to grow during the fall and winter, you're just gonna have reduced pest pressure, which is huge. I encourage many first-time gardeners to try growing a fall garden because the weather's beautiful. You don't deal with some of those common pests that you do. You're able to just kind of have a different shift. I also know summertime's really busy for people, and so maybe just you have a schedule that doesn't allow you to give the garden the maintenance that it needs. For us, we do have a massive slowdown during the fall and winter season, so I'm able to just dedicate more time to the garden and really nurture it more and be more successful. And so those are just 3 reasons. There are so many reasons why you should be growing a fall and winter garden, but those are some of the primary reasons why it might be appealing to you to start your first fall garden. So now that I have hopefully convinced you that you absolutely need to be growing a fall and winter garden, let's jump into the nitty-gritty, right? Let's get to the meat and potatoes of this, of what it actually takes in the planning side to be successful and to be able to harvest food this fall and winter. I would say it starts largely with planning ahead and choosing those right varieties. You guys, this is crucial, so crucial. And the biggest thing is you have to know your zone. That's, I would say, one of the first steps. If you're like, where do I even get started? You need to know your hardiness zone, your growing zone, because that's going to determine what the weather's going to be like for you and kind of that climate that you're growing in. You need to understand your first frost dates. And so there's the first and the last frost dates, and you're going to hone in on either one of these depending on the season that you're in. And so right now, as we're going into this fall and winter season, you need to know, when is that first frost date? If you don't know what this is, Google it. I'm going to show you guys right here just how easy it is to figure out your growing zone and your average first and last frost dates. These are things that need to be just fried in your brain. I feel like as you become a seasoned gardener, there are a couple things you just know and you can spit off, and it's going to be your growing zone and your first and last frost dates. And so these are crucial in your planning stage, because that's going to determine really how much food you can crank out, what varieties you're going to choose, and how to be successful this season. So the next crucial thing we're going to talk about is timing. In my opinion, timing is what is going to make or break your season, and it's because it's not a one size fits all. It's kind of tricky. I can share with you guys my planting calendar, which I am going to do, but I'm in zone 7B, and unless you're in the same zone as me or a similar growing climate as me, it's going to be different for you. This is going to require a little bit of work. I'm hoping to share something with you guys that will streamline it for you. But however, you know, say you live in Alaska and you've got a very, very short growing season. You have very limited daylight hours, which affects the growth of your plant and things like that. You are gonna have to become very creative. You might have to put up some row covers or some low tunnels. You're gonna have a bit more systems in place, as to where myself, growing in Arkansas, we don't really experience our first snow until late February, sometimes even early March. So I've got a pretty mild winter where I am able to crank out a bit more food. So it is important when we go into planning and shopping, which is the funnest part of the fall garden, right? Shopping through the seed catalog. Find those winter hardy varieties, those frost tolerant varieties. Most, you know, kales and Swiss chards and spinaches, these can handle a frost. There are carrots in my area that I actually overwinter in my raised beds, and the top may die off, but they're still stored down in there. But the real thing is even in July and August, you're having to go ahead and think ahead, because the idea is that you're going to be planning for your fall garden and your winter garden now. You're going to go ahead and starting things, maybe direct seeding, maybe you're buying transplants, and the idea is that you're going to harvest these before that really, really harsh frost sets in. Unless you are growing a frost tolerant variety that can withstand those low dip in temperatures, and maybe you are like us where we use row covers and low tunnels and we provide extra insulation and warmth to keep that soil warm, to keep those plants growing, that is also an option. But when you're thinking about the timing of it all, it's hot here. It was 100 degrees here today, and I was in my greenhouse starting seeds for the fall garden. Why is that? Because I understand my growing zone. I understand when my estimated first frost is, and I know that in order to be able to harvest those Brussels sprouts or those carrots or maybe kale or radish or whatever it is I'm growing, I need to already be thinking about that now towards the end of summer to make sure I can harvest before my winter actually sets in. And so we will be growing food up through January, and then January and February we let our beds rest, we amend them, and at that point we're starting seeds for our spring season. And it won't be very long before March and April we're planting all of our things out again. And so you can already see here how this is really crucial to understand your different zones, your climates, making sure you're planning ahead for this and choosing those right varieties. All right, so let's talk about knowing when to start these things. I kind of shared with you guys why it's important, but when I first started, figuring out a crop plan was a very intensive, overwhelming, several day process, because what I would do is I'd have giant erase boards. I would have a calendar printed off, and I would figure out my average first frost date. I mentioned this is crucial. So I would write down my average first frost date. I would then have to calculate the days to maturity of the varieties that I was wanting to grow. This is all listed on the back of the seed packet. So then I'd also figure out, all right, here's all of the varieties I want to grow. Here's the days to maturity. Sometimes it is worded as days to harvest, same thing. I would write that down for each of those varieties that I was wanting to grow. And then I would count backwards from the first frost date to each of those days to maturity to figure out when I needed to be starting these to be able to harvest in time before the frost killed them. It's a lot, right? That can be very, very time consuming. I think that this is the kicker. I do believe that because those steps can be overwhelming, it discourages people from wanting to grow fall and winter gardens. But I'm here to tell you, you can simplify this, you can make it work, you can have a well-oiled machine by the end of this. And so that is how I did it. And it was a very, very intensive process, but eventually the more you do it, the easier it does become. However, in the last year, I have been using a seeding calendar, which automatically does this for me, which has made things a whole lot easier. I'm going to share with you guys how to use it. And so there are easier, more efficient ways to go about it, in my opinion now, but those are the key principles of knowing for you specifically when you're going to be able to start your things, when you should be, you know, harvesting them based off of your first frost as well. All right, so I'm going to share with you guys my crop plan. This is kind of huge. If you want to use the same planting calendar that I use to make this easier, you guys can just click this link right up here. But I'm going to now walk you through what I'm using, how I figure this out, and how I really do think it's going to be a massive resource for you guys as well. So here we have my greenhouse production. I do have separate ones based off of where I'm growing at here, but you can see over here I have got all of the varieties plus additional succession. So my carrots, I'm doing 3 different successions of. Down here my lettuce, I'm doing multiple successions, my radishes, things like that. I do have this color coordinated, but you can see here, you know, in August, I'm prepping my beds for carrots, and then August 18th, I'm direct seeding. You guys, this is the summertime, and so it's crucial to know right here in July, I've already seeded that cauliflower because I want to be able to have 2 successions of cauliflower, because I know that as the temperatures start to drop off, they are going to slow down. Their growth is going to slow. And so how I calculate for that is by doing multiple successions and staggering them. And so you can see here I'm seeding cauliflower, you know, in July. I'm transplanting cauliflower in the beginning of August. Down here I'm cultivating, which just means I am, you know, preparing my beds, weeding, things like that. And then we're scrolling all the way down, and it's not until November that I start harvesting. The first week of November is when I am starting to harvest my cauliflower. And so if you do want bountiful fall seasons, these are things that you need to think about now. So I am just going to show you how to go in and add a crop. When you set up your account, it will ask you your zip code, and it will calculate your growing zone for you, and it will kind of auto-populate all of these things, which is really helpful. So I'm going to go in and add a new crop. I'm going to select which crop I want to grow. So let's see, one I maybe don't already have. Let's just say collards. I can also go in and choose the variety of collards that I want to grow. Vates is one I've always done. I do like to customize the color because it just makes it easier on me. We'll do this one in a blue. And then if you go to advanced setting here, you can see it populates that this is for the fall and winter. It tells you your seeding date. So I need to be seeding this 13 weeks before my first frost. And you can go in and manually change this, but I choose to let it default because it is pretty accurate. And so for me, instead of going in and trying to figure out my first frost, going through each plant with my calendar and calculating the days to maturity and working backwards, this is now taking all that guesswork out for me. I can say whether I'm going to transplant these or direct seed. So I'm going to transplant. It tells me when they're ready, that it's a cool season crop. It tells me the plant spacing. It's 21 days from maturity. My harvest window, my succession planting is 4 weeks apart. So I'm going to go ahead and schedule this, and let's see what it tells me. So in August 11 is when I'm going to start seeding my collards. In September, I'm going to be prepping the bed for that. Third week in September, I'm going to be transplanting them out. And let's see, it has us harvesting those collards the first week in October. So let's say that I want to do a succession of this. I'm going to go and just click the menu button, and I'm going to add a succession. Now, I really like this. I think that if you're a new gardener, this is great because it tells you, it gives you a warning. If you don't have protection, this crop's harvest may be compromised at this time. So consider protecting your plants. And so if you are new and you're unaware of maybe those varieties that aren't super frost tolerant, had I been putting in kale right now and I chose a variety that was frost tolerant, this warning would not have auto-populated for me. And so I do like that. I think that's also super helpful because then I know, all right, I need to make sure that I've got row cover. If I still want to grow another succession of this variety, I need to have some sort of insulation in place just to cover it from the frost. I'm going to go ahead and say okay because I do have row cover and the means to insulate this crop. And then what it's going to do is it's just going to add another one. I'm transplanting collards now in October, and I'm harvesting them in November. And so you can see here, you're just able to keep this same succession going. If I didn't have a plan here and I didn't know what I needed to start when, I understand this is kind of overwhelming. You can also break it down to where it's only showing you weekly tasks and what you need to do. But I like having a good overview like this because to me, it's not overwhelming. It gives me a clear idea of, yes, I can manage growing all of this, but maybe if it's your first time gardening, I talked about the importance of starting small, you might look at this and say, man, I actually don't have time in this week window to be seeding this, and this. Maybe I should just buy transplants. That might set me up for better success. So I think by having a plan and being able to map it out visually like this where you can see it, it gives you a clear idea of, is this manageable for me? Can I make this work with my schedule? Do I need to maybe pull back and not grow as many? Or maybe I need to have some of those season extension techniques in place, maybe a low tunnel, maybe a row cover, maybe something like that. And so when you can map it all out in here, and it calculates for you, I found that it just streamlined my success. It used to take me days to be able to plan out each crop plan based off of the season. I did all of this in 30 minutes, which was huge. It was a massive time saver. I put it all into task lists so it lets me know what I need to do when I need to do it. And so I do think this is a great resource. I can also print it out, laminate it, stick it in the greenhouse so we know each week our chores that need to be done, and it works really well for my family. So again, if you want to use the planting calendar I use, you can create a free account and get started. The link is just right up here. But once you figured out how you intend to execute your plan, whether you are just getting that whiteboard like how I did, maybe you want to do this in a Excel spreadsheet, which I have also done, or you choose to use an app like SeedTime to simplify it for you. That's how you figure out the planning stage. But then there are some other things that you need to think about to make sure that you have a really abundant fall and winter garden, and that is soil. I have an entire chapter in my book, The Tiny But Mighty Farm, and it talks about how soil is the life and longevity of your farms, and I 100% believe that this is the truth. I think it's something that gets overlooked. It's not really sexy talking about soil, right? But if you don't have the foundation of your house built, you can't start building the interior walls. You obviously can't start decorating the landscaping you'll never even get to. And so I do feel like if you want to have a abundant, productive garden garden at any scale. You have to build that foundation solid, and in this case, that happens to be the soil. If you have a solid foundation, you have good soil, then you can start building those beautiful abundant gardens. So how you go about that is getting a soil test done. You can do home kits, you can mail them off, but get a soil analysis test. Figure out what your soil is deficient in, amend accordingly, use some sort of organic fertilizer, prebiotic. Make sure you're just, if you have grown a summer garden, you've depleted all that soil of the nutrients. And so it is important to replenish those nutrients before you start planting again. And so the way to do that is just figure out what your soil is deficient in. Make sure you amend accordingly, just so that that's something you don't have to worry about anymore. And then I touched on this, but I want to reiterate it. Find those varieties that thrive well. Although you can do it, you're not gonna see me growing tomatoes in December. I do grow in a high tunnel. I could, provide an additional heat source and maybe, see some yields, but I think that we really start having success when we grow within the appropriate seasons. We really tap into seasonal eating. And I know this is hard because when you go into a grocery store in December, January, February, there are peppers, there are tomatoes, there are strawberries. You guys, these things are being transported in miles and miles and miles away. There are no local farmers, depending on your zone, that are growing these things. And so you have to adapt and understand how to eat seasonally. And so for me, I'm not going to grow tomatoes in the wintertime. Just like I'm not gonna try to crank out, cabbage in the dead of summer. And so figure out those seasonal appropriate varieties, grow them within their season to where they thrive, where they taste better, have higher nutritional content, and you have fewer issues. If you did try to grow tomatoes in the wintertime, you could possibly make it happen with all those extra steps, but it's not gonna be easy. And that's because a tomato is a warm season crop. It thrives with the heat. It's not going to be as productive. It's going to require more maintenance, which means you're not being super efficient with your time. And so for me, I think the reason we have such a successful fall and winter garden is because I'm growing those varieties that thrive in the cold. They can handle a light frost. They are meant to be grown within that season. And I just kind of have leveraged this. I know my growing zone. I know how our weather and our climate operates in my region. And I've leveraged this to my advantage to grow those crops that I know thrive well in each appropriate season. And so when you are shopping through the catalog, figure out, and the best way to know, I love this, right? There's so many things I love about gardening, but I love the community aspect of it. You want to know how I knew what varieties did well in my area? I talked to farmers. When I went to the farmers market, I would ask them questions. I called up local large-scale farms near me and asked them, hey, what varieties are you growing? I tried to grow this variety of kale. It was bitter, it bolted, and they would say, oh yeah, that's not a good variety in our area. You should grow this variety instead. And the great thing about this community is that we are community minded. And so I have never had a gardener or a farmer I've talked to tell me, I'm not willing to help you. They have been more than eager to give me their advice, just like I'm more than eager to pass on my advice to someone else, and I'm sure you are as well. And yes, while you are rummaging through that seed catalog, it will tell you if they are frost tolerant. Some seed catalogs will even tell you the suggested season to grow them in. Johnny's is a great resource for this. But you can just ask your local community and they will be more than happy to let you know what grows well in your area. And so this is what I did starting out. I think it's great if you don't really know where to start. Or maybe you can follow someone, whether that's YouTube, Instagram, something like that, in a similar growing zone to you, and kind of use that as a reference. I know a lot of people will comment and just say, I'm so glad we live in the same zone because you're my cue on when I need to be starting things, when I need to be transplanting them. And I think that's perfectly fine because you're still learning, and then eventually maybe you won't have to follow that person to know when to start your seeds or when to transplant, because you will have been doing it for a while, that you've kind of, figured out what works well for you. And the last thing I want to touch on when it comes to fall gardening one-on-one, setting yourself up for success, is again, knowing, are you going to implement any of those season extension techniques, right? Do you have the means to put some row cover up? Maybe you can create some little low tunnels. Maybe you are growing like me in high tunnels and you have that extra protected culture. If you aren't, you can still grow food. I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there was a lot of things I grew and I mastered mastered and I learned while not growing in a high tunnel. Don't be limited by that. Mulch. You know, we use leaves, which is a free resource, and we'll heavily mulch the things that we're overwintering in the ground here. It works beautifully for us, but also you can buy some row cover, you can buy 9-gauge wire, maybe PVC pipe, and you can make these hoops and create these little microclimates in your gardens to just insulate your soil better. But you need to have that plan, figure out on the front end, do you have the means and the resources to do this? If not, it really comes back to the timing and the planning. You want to make sure that you're getting those things seeded or transplanted out before that harsh frost if you do not have the means to protect them when that cold frost comes. And so I hope this video helped you if you are in that planning stage, knowing when to time your crops, sharing with you some of the resources I've used to streamline this for myself and my family. But more than anything, I hope you guys grow gardens in this upcoming season. It is such a joy. I love it. So I would love to know in the comments, are you growing fall and winter gardens? If you would like me to touch on more things in depth, please leave it in the comments so I know how to best serve you guys. But thank you all for hanging out with me today. I'll talk to you soon.